Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Dr. Grossman for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you for the opportunity to address you. My name is Miriam Grossman. I am a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, author, and senior fellow at Do No Harm. I have been taking care of patients for 45 years. I'm going to use my time to respond to Dr. McNamara. First, I'm struck by her use of the phrase, sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier. Dr. McNamara claims that her views are science-based, but to claim that sex is assigned at birth is without any scientific basis whatsoever. Its language misleads people, especially children, into thinking that male and female are arbitrary designations and can change. That is simply not true. Dr. McNamara claims that social and medical interventions are the only evidence-based treatment and that scientific evidence shows it is life-saving. Without it, she's warning us, kids will commit suicide. Well, a growing number of countries have effectively banned the care to which she's referring. And thank God there's been no wave of suicides or other mental health catastrophes. 3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors. Sweden did the same thing after a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers. An investigation concluded, quote, the risks of anti-puberty and hormone treatment for those under 18 currently outweigh the possible benefits. The UK conducted a review and called the evidence very low. They've also placed severe restrictions on the care that Dr. McNamara calls life-saving. Norway also analyzed the data and has made similar changes in policy. The National Academy of Medicine in France warned, quote, great medical caution must be taken in children and adolescents given the vulnerability of this population and the many undesirable, even serious complications the therapies cause. Doctors in New Zealand and Australia have published similar statements. Is Dr. McNamara suggesting that all these countries are rejecting evidence-based treatment and placing their kids at risk of suicide? Regarding that point of view, Finland's gender expert, Dr. Rita Kaltiela, said, quote, it's purposeful disinformation, the spreading of which is irresponsible. All 7 countries, and Florida too, of course, concluded that kids don't need their development interrupted, the girls don't need their periods stopped and their voices lowered, and the boys don't need to grow breasts. What they need is psychotherapy. I have other objections to Dr. McNamara's testimony. She insists that her position, only hers, represents standard medical care. What she doesn't want you to know is that there is no standard. There's a debate. There's a fierce debate. And on the side opposite her stand such prominent figures as Stephen Levine, Kenneth Zucker, Paul McHugh, and James Cantor, among others. These doctors are giants in the field. They have been treating transgender patients and gathering data and publishing papers about them, and I mean no disrespect here, but since before Dr. McNamara was born. The point is that those veteran clinicians and others who have wisdom and experience are ignored because they disagree with the current narrative. They're against medical interventions for the same reason those 7 countries are. There is no evidence of long-term benefit, but there is evidence of harm. I'll end by quoting Jamie Reed, the courageous whistleblower from the Children's Gender Clinic in St. Louis. I believe that that hospital receives the medical education funding that we're discussing today. She said that doctors at that clinic said, we are building the plane while we are flying it. We are building the plane while we are flying it. That's how they described the treatment at their gender clinic. Our precious tax dollars should not support such a perilous experiment.
I can't help but feel that this doctor's voice deserves to be heard all over the world, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, because there is a clarity, conviction, and a steadiness that we don't often see anymore. You see? And I recognize truth when I hear it. Yeah, because truth has a certain ring to it, you see? Just the same way Jesus said, "My sheep knows my voice." And people say things like, 50 years from now, we'll look back and ask ourselves, how did this lunacy ever happen? And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That's a very good question, because future generations will shake their heads at this. It's terrible, because the fact that a doctor has to take a stand and explain basic biology is madness enough. Literally. This is a rebuke of a demonic lie. And I understand that language completely. I really do. Because deception always starts by twisting identity. You see? And we see that all the way back from Genesis chapter 3 onward. Because the moment you confuse someone about who they are, everything else becomes easy to manipulate. Yeah. But hey, finally, an actual doctor, someone who deals in facts and not emotion, someone who isn't swept up in ideology, and someone who is willing to speak plainly, even if it will cost them. You see? And you can hear frustration. You can tell that she cares. You see? And that's rare in a world that rewards silence over courage. And how terrible is that? And you know, there's this line that she delivered that hits like a hammer. Sex is not assigned to birth. In other words, sex is established at conception, ladies and gentlemen. That's just a fact. That's not politics. That is truth woven in creation itself. You see? And Psalms 139 testifies, "You knit me together in my mother's womb." It's clear. So this doctor, she simply acknowledged what God is already set in order. Yeah. And yet the mainstream mental health world calls it harmful. Can you imagine? Harmful for telling the truth. Yeah. In other words, we have reached a point where truth is considered dangerous. Yeah. And confusion is celebrated, ladies and gentlemen. That alone tells you the kind of times we are now living in. In other words, it's all spiritual warfare. You know, hiding behind medical terminology. This is deep. And it's actually insane that we are even having to argue about this. That's what always, boggles my mind. We're even literally having to argue about this. Honestly, the fact that grown adults need a lecture on basic biology shows how far we have drifted. Clearly from the Bible, Romans 1. It's like as if it's unfolding in real time before our eyes, where people exchange truth for a lie, and sanity slips away. You see? But what I appreciate most is that she explains things gently. She doesn't mock. She doesn't tear down. She stands firm, a true physician. You see? A protector, a voice of sanity in a world that is full of confusion. Yeah. And the question people keep asking is that why isn't this video on every major news network or channel? Why? Well, it's obvious. Because truth is inconvenient when it threatens profit, politics, or power. That's it. Yeah. But hey, thank God that this woman has the courage to fight back, because you can imagine the kind of opposition that she had to endure to get to this point. It's not a small thing, ladies and gentlemen. No. And the funny thing, ladies and gentlemen, it seems as if it's not the kids who need therapy nowadays anymore. It's actually the parents. Yeah, because in many cases, that's painfully true. Because kids are being pulled into adult confusion, and adults are calling it compassion. But that's not real compassion, because real compassion protects. It doesn't experiment on vulnerable souls. It doesn't do that. You see? That's why we have to protect this woman at all costs, ladies and gentlemen. Because truth tellers in every generation, they have paid the price. There's always a price to pay. The prophets of old, they did it. The apostles, they did it. In other words, anyone who stands in front of a crowd and speaks what's right will eventually face resistance. That has been the case. And at the end of the day, what stands out to me the most is that she's not just a doctor. She's actually a watchman on the wall, ladies and gentlemen. And I thank God for people like her who are willing to stand in the gap. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy this one, be sure to click on the next one. You will definitely enjoy it too.